To give us some insight into not only that primary race in Mississippi, but others elsewhere, is the CEO of Insider Advantage and publisher of the Southern Political Report, the longest-running continuous political newsletter in these United States. It's our good friend Matt Towery. Matt, we welcome you back to America's Forum.
Good morning, JD, and good morning, Francesca.
Good morning.
It's great to have you Skyping in. Now, we take a look at Mississippi. And Mississippi had an open primary, which means anybody could show up and vote. Thad Cochran made overtures to non-Republicans. In the final analysis, did non-Republicans give Cochran the edge to again win the Republican nomination for the Senate?
JD, it's likely they did. This was a super hot runoff. The turnout was phenomenal for a U.S. Senate seat. Thad Cochran looked like he was down and out just a few weeks earlier, but the Haley Barbour organization coming in along with Trent Lott and the addition of Brett Favre running a last-minute TV commercial that really had an effect in that state did pull, along with their targeted effort to bring folks to the polls, did bring some crossover Democrats to this primary, voting for Thad Cochran and keeping him in the U.S. Senate.
So, Cochran wins on the strength of the Brett Favre endorsement. I mean, much was made in political circles about Trent Lott, who had some bad blood with Senator Cochran, let's be honest, during their days in the Senate. But Trent Lott and Haley Barbour and the Mississippi establishment was behind Thad Cochran. But you say it's quite frankly a Brett Favre factor in this primary as well. We seem to have a frozen transmission from Matt Towery. We will try to regain it. And interesting what can transpire here. So we have that contact via Skype renewed with Matt Towery. Matt, thanks for hanging in with us again. You were about to answer the question. Was it the Favre advantage, the Favre endorsement, a non-politician weighing in that helped make the difference?
Yes, JD. Really, in Mississippi, what they're saying primarily is that the Favre commercial really ignited this campaign. I mean, Cochran looked like he was tired. In some interviews, he seemed to sort of be out of it a little bit in what he had to say, and they were really picking on that. But at the last second, with this Favre commercial coming in and an effort to bring in Democrats who wanted to hold on to that power that Mississippi enjoys with such a high-ranking senator, even on the Republican side, it all came together to give Thad Cochran just enough votes. And if you look at the way Mississippi voted, the central part of the state voted primarily for Cochran. It was those areas close down to the coast and those up near Memphis that were the areas that were the toughest for Cochran. If you look down in some of those areas, particularly to the south, in the southern part of Mississippi, that's where Brett Favre probably made the difference for Cochran in helping bring in just enough votes to keep him in the U.S. Senate.
John McCain came in for Cochran. We've heard Sarah Palin supported McDaniel. What does that say about the current rift nationally in the Republican Party, Matt?
Well, that's interesting because much is being made of it, and it is true. There is this Tea Party versus establishment battle going on. And right now, if you were keeping score, you would probably say that absent the one Cantor victory that we saw a few weeks ago, the establishment GOP is managing to stave off most of these Tea Party candidates who they think might not be so electable in November, that much to the chagrin of the Democrats. But I don't think this is a long-term problem for the Republican Party. You go back to 1980 when Ronald Reagan was running, and in 1976 when he ran against Gerald Ford, you had the Reaganites and you had the Ford side, and it appeared that the GOP was going to be divided forever. What did they do? They all ended up uniting at the last minute, defeating Jimmy Carter and creating 8 years, probably the most memorable 8 years of a presidency for Republicans in many, many decades, if not in the last century.
So you have accurately stated the challenge for Mississippi Republicans, whether they're grassroots conservatives or members of the establishment, and that's ending the animosity, uniting the party. Now, we're still waiting on a couple of things if this is going to happen, Matt. Number one, Chris McDaniel, as I understand it, has yet to concede. Last night, he complained about voting irregularities or that possibility. Take a listen.
But there is something a bit strange. There is something a bit unusual about a Republican primary that's decided by liberal Democrats. So much for bold colors. So much for principle. I guess they can take some consolation in the fact that they did something tonight by once again compromising, by once again reaching across the aisle, by once again abandoning the conservative movement.
So abandoning the conservative movement, the battle cry, the ongoing battle for Chris McDaniel. Now, do you think he's going to sleep on this, Matt, and not demand a recount? Because this is a razor-thin margin. What is Chris McDaniel going to do?
Well, in some states, and I don't know the Mississippi law, if you're within 1%, you have an automatic recount. I don't know if they fall within that category. But I think Chris McDaniel will certainly, there'll be hurt feelings, but in the end, he'll come around to Thad Cochran, because what's the alternative? To support a Democrat, to sit on your hands and let the state go Democrat? There's too much pressure on Mississippi right now. Mississippi's not considered a major swing state, and the nominee is expected to win, but it was going to be viewed as competitive if McDaniel had won. So in the end, I think he's going to have to come around and look towards the future. Thad Cochran is probably in his last term here. I hate to say that. And I think that he needs to look towards the future, expecting to do so. But boy, when these things, emotions get raw like this, JD, as you well know, in these races, it takes a while to get over those bruised feelings, particularly when you feel like you did have crossover vote that affected a Republican primary.
Matt, looking ahead to November, I want to ask you, is there a real danger that grassroots conservatives will leave the Senate ballot blank and vote in other races down the ticket? And if so, is there a chance that Democrats can defeat Thad Cochran?
You know, I don't see that happening. In fact, in almost every instance that I've ever polled or looked at a race, particularly in these southern states that I sort of specialize in, they almost always come home. People think that the Republicans, the more conservatives, or back in the 1980s, early 1990s, you had the Christian Coalition as a major factor, sort of a wedge within against the establishment Republicans. And you always thought that they would stay home, but at the last second, they would join hands. I mean, Haley Barbour and Trent Lott and Thad Cochran himself, but particularly Haley, they're masters at putting together coalitions, and they know to let everybody cool down, calm down. But in the end, you're going to have people like Sarah Palin and others who are going to turn around and come back to make sure, if Thad Cochran looks like he's on the ropes, that they keep Thad Cochran because they want to take control of the U.S. Senate. So
James, and again, we're having a little freeze up with Skype. We hope to reestablish it, but Francesca, that's interesting to hear. It's his belief that Sarah Palin and others will come in and the Republican Party, the grand old party, will in effect in Mississippi become one happy family. James, we're going to move along here now, talk about another Senate primary of more than casual interest. In Oklahoma, Congressman James Lankford had an easy time of beating former House Speaker T.W. Shannon by 21%. Now, this is interesting. James Lankford, a Baptist pastor, ran what was known as the largest summer youth camp in Oklahoma during his days in the pastorate. Meantime, T.W. Shannon was, as you see, an African-American, also affiliated with the Chickasaw Indian tribe, the Chickasaw tribe with gaming interests. Retiring Senator Tom Coburn, a very vocal opponent of Indian gaming. So a question for analysts remains, what did Coburn do, if anything, to step in publicly or privately to help Lankford in the final analysis? And again, Lankford wins by more than 20 points. In Colorado, a couple of my former House colleagues squared off in the Republican primary for governor. It looks like Bob Beaupre has edged out Tom Tancredo, but there were two other candidates, the Secretary of State, Scott Gessler, and a former state senator, Mike Kopp. As you take a look at that distribution of the vote by Republicans statewide in Colorado, it appears the presence of those two other candidates denied Tancredo, a border hawk, the chance to win nomination. We apologize. There is a reversal on pictures here. Bob Beaupre, Tom Tancredo is actually in the Beaupre slot, so we apologize to Tancredo for a mistake of identity right there. But Bob Beaupre victorious in that Republican gubernatorial primary in Colorado. Francesca, to be sure, there were other races. For example, in New York State, House races. We will get to all of those as we continue our political discussions coming up. But straight ahead, another of my old colleagues, Pete Hoekstra, will join us to talk intelligence worldwide in the wake of the unraveling in Iraq. In the meantime, we welcome your comments via social media. You can tweet us at Newsmax TV, #America's Forum.